for coming. Welcome to After Hours winter term. We are kicking it off with the one and only Paige DePaepe. So she is a Oregon grad who Deb has sent our way and graced us with her presence. She's currently working at Death of Bad as an art director, and everyone should stalk her portfolio as soon as this is done because it's insane. So here we are, and we're really excited to get going. She's going to do a workshop presentation for all of us, and then write down any questions you have, and we will just throw them all her way at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So, I mean, first, before I have like a little deck prepared, but that's kind of just like a loose, place to start talking from. But I want to know, like, do we have juniors, seniors? Who's representing right now? Juniors, raise your hand. No junior, one junior, two juniors. Sweet. And then seniors, everybody else, three. Okay, cool. And then art directors, designers. Where are we at? Cool. And then copywriters? Question mark. Woo, nice. And then any other account people? Awesome. Oh yeah, anyone below a junior? That's a good question. All right, sweet. Okay, cool. So, okay, this is good because this means that my stuff will probably apply to you. I was kind of worried that maybe I was making it too art director heavy, but yeah, we should be good. So I will share my super awesome presentation. Cool. Yeah, so like I said, I'm just gonna keep this kind of loose. I've got a couple of different categories, and I basically just want to talk about a few things that I know that I was curious about and either didn't ask or just didn't hear very often from people who gave sort of guest speaking or guest lectures. But mostly, I'd love to hear questions from y'all, stuff that, you maybe don't want to ask Deb or, just, I don't know, like just random things. But I'll go over kind of who I am, what I've been doing for the past 3 years, what my process was like getting a job, because I'm sure most of you as seniors and like juniors are starting to think, okay, how do I even bridge the gap between school and my first career? And then I'm going to go over some stuff that I've personally found was like crucial from my time at U of O that I use all the time in the working world. And then I'll touch on some just general creative stuff, like making things and being inspired. So first off, who is Paige? Quick facts, I'm an art director. I live in Los Angeles, and I've been in Los Angeles for my whole career. I graduated in 2017, so I've been out for just over 3 years. And I've been at 2 agencies in that time, both of which have been small. So my first job out of college, I got in October of 2017. And that was at a company called Haymaker. And when I started, there were only 4 people who worked there. Technically, I was employee number 1 because the other people were the 2 guys who founded it, Matt and Jay, and then some freelancers and a designer named Kim. And then by the time that I left there, we were up to around 10 employees with some freelancers that kind of like came and went as we had need based on projects. And what I worked on during that time, I wanted to create just a little timeline so that you guys can kind of get a picture of like maybe how many projects do you work on at a time, especially at a small agency, is a little bit different than like if you were to get, brought on at maybe like, a Droga 5 or a Wieden Kennedy or something like that. You might be on 1 project or maybe 2. In a smaller agency, you kind of touch everything. So my main account there was Reef, so like sandals, surfing, all that kind of stuff. And we did everything from a total rebrand to just like everyday social stuff for them. So that was kind of my bread and butter. But I also worked on some stuff for the Hollywood Bowl, which is a major venue down here. Eagle Creek, which is a backpack and luggage company, and Game Changer, which is a sports coordination app for like parents who have like multiple kids in sports. And then I did a ton of Haymaker branded stuff. So things for the website, things for our social, sort of internal facing agency things. And then probably about 4 months after I started there, we started doing a ton of pitches. So we were working on a new pitch for business probably every 3 to 4 weeks. So I got to work on a lot of different brands for very short amounts of time. And that really kind of builds your like muscle towards just creating things and also learning a bunch of different businesses. Oh yeah, and then I color coded it. So the stuff in white is stuff that I actually got to like produce and went all the way to the end of the project. And then the stuff in red is stuff that kind of like died along the way or got cut short for some reason. There's like a lot of different reasons why you might not finish a project when you're in sort of a career in advertising. And it's kind of sad because you don't get to like, share or talk about those things, but they're still really valuable experiences. And you get to make some pretty cool stuff. Well, not quite fully make, you know what I mean? You get to work on cool stuff. So yeah, and then my second job, which I'm at currently, is at an agency called Death of Bad, and it's also small. We have 6 employees, but the agency model is a little bit different. So for some clients, we interact with them like a traditional agency would, doing sort of all of your concepting and creating. And then for other clients, we work kind of as like a hired gun assassin, sort of creative assassin for their internal creative teams. So we might kind of come in and supplement large global corporations if they need help with something that's like Japan specific. Because Death of Bad is half Japanese. I forgot to mention that. Yeah, and so throughout a year, we might have between 40 and 100 freelance people work with us just based on different projects. So even though it's a really small core team, we have a lot of like project-based individuals that we get to interface with. So it feels bigger sometimes. I've worked on Oculus, which is VR. So that was pretty cool, specifically the For Good part of their business. I did some pitching for Honda and JAL, which is Japanese Airlines. We worked on a brand called Ripple, which is a fintech, like finance tech company. We did a project with Beats. And then I've done a lot of work with Apple Music and App Store, specific to the Japan side. And then most recently, I've been working on cool secret stuff, which I unfortunately can't share, but that should be dropping relatively soon. So I guess this is just like a check back on my portfolio. Hopefully sometime in February, I'll have that updated. And then always new business. The other interesting thing about Death of Bad is that we have, like I said, half of our company is Japanese facing. So we do a lot of stuff that runs in non-US markets. So I've had ads that we've made run in the UK, Philippines, Thailand, India, UAE, as well as US, and then global. I put that in there because sometimes when you make stuff that's like just for internet, it'll get, broadcast everywhere and there's not like one country as an audience. Yeah, so that's been a really awesome and interesting experience. So some small agency life stuff. You do a lot more than just art direct, which can be a total blessing or a curse. I mean, I do a ton of writing in my job. I've also done strategy, as well as you kind of thread the line between designer and art director because you kind of have to be both in some situations. Yeah, so you have to learn a lot of stuff on the job regularly. So if you like teaching yourself and if you're able to sort of like do that and figure things out as you go, smaller agencies might be a really good fit. Yeah, and then small agency doesn't necessarily mean small clients. I mean, as you can sort of, hopefully there's some name recognition in some of the accounts that I just listed, but it's kind of cool because as companies move sort of further away from agency of record, it kind of creates this interesting space for non-giant agencies to work on projects for big companies, but then sort of be this like flexible team in and of themselves. So yeah, because everyone's moving more towards a project-based work. Yeah, and then one kind of downside that I've realized that I didn't really think about initially is that it is a little bit harder to make industry friends if you're at a 6-person company because you don't have that kind of like natural, like, oh, I can just go meet people from the other team, in like a 100-person office. So, but because I've met a lot of freelancers, I'm able to sort of network in that way, but it has taken a little bit more, I would say, concerted effort to keep in contact or to create new contacts within sort of the ad sphere down here in LA. Yeah. So a couple notes on non-US market and global work, which is not something I thought when I graduated. That wasn't like on my mind at all of something I wanted to do or anything. It kind of just came with the job. And I've really enjoyed sort of figuring that out and getting those new experiences. But a couple of things I've really taken away from it is like there are so many markets out there that are doing interesting ad work that you probably don't hear about from trade pubs or within school. So like Thai advertising is a really great example. They create some really hysterical stuff. Like, and Thai markets have like their audiences will pay attention to longer things. So if you research Thai advertising, you'll get these like 15-minute, pieces, which is incredible. So I recommend looking up this one brand called Chandrite, or you can just type in Thai advertising funny bug and it will come up, or Sure, which is like a diet pill, but both of them are just sort of these great and wacky examples of work that's being done that doesn't feel like it would fit in the US market, but it's really interesting. And so with that, I would say that finding inspiration from global perspectives is totally an AD essential, because it makes it like your entire job is really to continually be educating yourself on like different styles. And if you're not if you're always looking at the same stuff, then your work is going to inevitably look the same. And there are really talented people working in pretty much every country, or not pretty much every country around the world. Like there are going to be good designers, there's going to be good art directors. So I would definitely say challenge yourself to find those people in unexpected places. And then one thing I've learned also is just understanding a culture takes a lot of time, research, and listening. So like, I am very fortunate that one of my bosses is Japanese. And so when we're working on Japanese facing audiences for a project, a lot of my time is just spent asking him, questions. And eventually you get to the point where you sort of start to get a feel for like what rings true and what is sort of maybe a stereotype that you are coming into a position with. And so I think, it's just a great position to be in, to really take your time. And I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that even as an art director, it's so important to do your research. And that you're not necessarily going to be able to understand every audience instantly, but you can sort of work towards that. It just takes time and practice, essentially. So getting a job, which is, I'm sure, a very big thing on everybody's mind. I'm just going to share a little bit of my process. So I started looking in December, so what would be like around now, before I graduated. And then I graduated in June of 2017, and I didn't get an offer until September. And I'm not going to lie, that was brutal. It was pretty tough. Like you're sitting there and you're watching friends get offers and it's super exciting, but you're like, man, when is it going to be my turn? Like, when am I going to get chosen, And during that entire time, the number of real interviews that I had for like an open position was 3. But what I realized is that literally every conversation could be an actual interview and you might not know it. Or you might know it's an interview, but it's going to feel like just a very casual conversation. Like, I don't think I ever had an interview that had like classic, what's your greatest weakness kind of questions. It just doesn't happen. And then to actually get to that point of getting those interviews, I made around 80 contacts. So that's everything from a email to an informal interview to, actual physical written letters, phone calls, those awkward DM LinkedIns. It took a lot of points of contact to even get to that point where I was able to sort of have, real shots at like getting a job. And that whole task can be really daunting. And I just say that to say that, that wasn't even during a pandemic. So I'm so sorry. You guys have just a really brutal sort of life situation ahead of you. But just keep at it. Like, it will happen. And what I found is that I never actually got a response from any job application fill out forms. Like if you see like a job opening on a website and they have like a form or something and you submit an application, I never actually heard back from any of those. And maybe that's just, I really suck at filling out forms. Like that totally could be a thing. But I just want to say, like, prioritize your time with actual individual people who can like see you as an individual. And it was the same exact situation for the second time I looked for a job. It took me 5 months and over 120 contacts to get in contact with the people that I'm actually working with now. And the other sad thing is you'll probably be ghosted by a company at some point. It really hurts and it sucks. So don't take it personally, because you could have a great book. You could even have had a great interview. I don't know why that happens. I think it's lame and it needs to stop, but I don't know, it happened to me. So if it happens to you, don't take it personally. Yeah. So on the bright side, there's a ton of resources about really detailed how to get good at interviews, how to write a good cover letter, whatever. Like Natalie Kim, We Are Next, you guys probably know her, she's awesome. So I'm not going to go into all of that because she's already done it so much better than me. But what I found is that honestly, asking good questions and responding promptly are the two best things that you can do to stand out. It's really simple. And you can kind of think about it like dating, in that asking good questions and responding promptly is the best way to make a good impression. But also, you're not going to fit with every agency. So if you're having an interview, don't kind of like try to answer the right way that you think that they're looking for, because it's not going to be a good first day at work if you've totally changed how you are in order to fit in the interview. So also best of luck. And if you need anything, reach out to me. Like I would love to go over, you know, if you have like an email that's like a reach out or whatever, I can proofread, I can give you tips on that. I've written over, 120 of them. So yeah, now secret sauce. What did I find is to be the most effective use of my time at the U of O? Obviously classes inside the J school are super important, but the ones outside of the J school have been surprisingly crucial. All of your art history classes, like they might feel dry at the time, but they are so crucial to just building a repertoire of different styles, and also to be able to know how, like what the history of those styles are. So when you're using a certain art, direction, or you're referencing a certain piece, you actually know like what did it originally mean, like what's the context, what am I bringing into this thing, like if you don't know that Supreme is a direct ripoff of Barbara Kruger, then you need to know that stuff. The other one is media aesthetics, which is a class that's actually an intro to cinema studies. I found that being able to have just a basic language of talking about directing, talking about how a sequence in film gets put together, and having those basic film languages is so important. And that's not just for art directors, that's for copywriters too. Because if you get to the point where you're actually making commercials, you have to talk about that kind of stuff, not only with the clients, but also with the actual director. And you don't want to look like a noob, your independent study art classes and independent J school classes should always be your hardest, because you want to put your most effort into the things that you can actually put in your book. And that's going to come from your independent studies. So if you're trying to decide between how much time should I put in to this upper level J school independent study versus your core curriculum kind of J school stuff, definitely opt for your independent studies, because that's where you really build your skills. And then actual physical typesetting. I took that, and it really just helps you fundamentally understand, like, leading is way more cool to learn about when it has to do with an actual strip of lead, So like getting that sort of tactile interaction with type is really helpful. Learning random skills. And I put an asterisk by random because it's never actually random. Everything comes back in some way or another. So I'd say choose projects to learn new tools, especially as a senior. That can be hard because you kind of get to a spot, especially winter term, you're trying to make a bunch of work, you're trying to get your book all polished and stuff. So you kind of tend, and I did this too, you tend to lean towards like, okay, I know how to do this skill already, so I'm gonna create this project, based on the stuff I already know how to do, just to get it out there. Definitely like try to incorporate at least one new skill into everything that you make. Because right now what you're doing is creating your repertoire of, I know how to do this, and everything that you can add to that is just going to help you to not have to learn things on the job so fast. The pen tool is always applicable. Literally every program has its version of the pen tool. So like I made a font while I was a senior, and I made myself learn like pen tool everything out, which was a total pain in the ass, but has really saved me. Build your own comps. I can't stress this one enough, because you have to put everything in situ. Like every project that I'm on, they're always wanting like, hey, can you put this like billboard into this like thing over here? And if you don't get really good really fast at like building in situ work, you're just going to be on the struggle bus. So plus it just looks nice. Like if you can make something look real, you are that much closer to selling it. Sorry, can you guys hear the leaf blower outside, or are you good? Like, yeah.
Oh, good. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, sweet. This always happens at the worst possible time. Anyway. Yeah, and then lastly, look for opportunity to work with different kinds of materials and to create physical things. Every time I had someone look at my portfolio, the stuff they wanted to talk about was like the actual like stuff that I had made. So like I made a flip book that was Drake dancing to Hotline Bling, or like I laser cut this little throne for Coleman's Mustard to sit on. And people really like to see those kinds of different materials being used because it's just kind of fun. Yeah, so if you explore the resources of like the craft center, use the laser cutters, use vinyl printers, like all that kind of stuff, really just adds texture to your book, and is memorable. Lastly, campus jobs. This is kind of like, this is a nice to have, but if you need work, look for something that pays you to practice. And then pick experiences and teams that you can fully commit to. Like I worked for campus copy and printing, and I use my printing knowledge all the time. Also like science and memory is super valuable. Just anything that can give you like practical team experience and practical designing experience is really important. Even if the job itself isn't great. I also worked for like the Career Center designing flyers, which is not glamorous, and I didn't use that work at all in my book, but just having the sort of hours in the program was really important. And then also I like made contacts that way. Like my old bosses, I still talk to them. Yeah, so keep up with your peers and contacts. That goes for in the J school, out of the J school, like they're gonna be your lifeline eventually. Sorry, there's about to be a dude with a leaf blower like right next to my door, so yeah. Anyway, lastly, general creative stuff. You guys probably know about these, but just in case you don't, because actually I've run into some senior level designers who don't know about design inspiration, and I think that's hysterical. But it's basically like the grown-up version of Pinterest for designers, and it has like a cool like color search factor to it, which is great. It's a good place to like keep things. Definitely, I think one thing I regret doing or regret not doing in school was collecting more visual material. Your job is like 65% pulling references. Actually, maybe that's a little overstated, probably like 40%. You basically have to have a reference for everything that you want a client to do. So that includes animation. Animation references are so tough to find because you're like, oh, I know I've seen that, but like I don't know like what clip to like explain that I've seen that. So Pinterest actually has a great search engine for animation. They have a ton of GIFs. So that one is an interesting one because I kind of tend to lump Pinterest into the live, laugh, love kind of category. But yeah, they're great for that. And then Instagram Discover page. If you train your Instagram to bring you creative things, it is just that much better to like build your repertoire of sort of visual references. So, and then obviously I have a save feature, everyone knows that. And then the last one, if you need just straight up like weird art stuff, but does it float, is wonderful. It's super well curated. They'll do random stuff, and it's very like conceptual art. So I don't use them a ton for like actual references, but they might spark an interesting idea. So that's a good one. And then, oh yes, these animate, I forgot about that. And then lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about practicing creativity when you don't feel like it. Because I feel like this year has been particularly brutal, just emotionally and in so many other ways. And sometimes that makes it really difficult to want to make things when you feel like I'm dealing with everything else that's happening in the world and in life. So one thing that I've been trying to focus on this year specifically is sort of allowing myself to be creative in what I consume as well as what I put out. So like setting an achievable goal in like what you're consuming creatively might be, I want to see the Oscar Best Picture film from every year in the last 10 years. Or I like my personal one is actually watching directors to understand their style. So I'll go through and watch like the Coen brothers, and then I'll watch like Quentin Tarantino and Wes Anderson, things like that. So you can just sort of start to build up a general database of knowledge that has to do with your job, but isn't like directly an output of creativity. The other thing is collecting stuff. Like I said, so much of your job is about references and it's about having just a knowledge of visual style. So every day, my challenge is to collect one thing that's new, one thing that you like, and one thing that you don't like. And then the practice is explain to yourself, why might someone like this? Because not every project is going to be focused on people like yourself. It might be someone that you're totally not like, and maybe a particular style that you don't personally like is really right for that audience. So it's good to have a variety of things. Otherwise, your stuff will just look the same. And then find a creative accountability partner and send each other stuff. So I've been doing that with my boss recently. And then I have a couple other friends where if I find something cool, I'll just hit them, with an email or a link or whatever. And they do the same with me. And that works the best if you have someone who is sort of similar, but also sort of different, because they'll send you stuff that's like cool that you never would have found. And then lastly, if you're super stuck, buy a hard copy magazine. Sometimes being on 4 screens at a time just isn't good for you, and you need something that's like you can hold in your hand and unplug a little bit from. So yeah, that's what I got for y'all today. So questions, what do you want to talk about?
That was amazing. Thank you so much. I personally was just taking notes on the entire thing and also sending screenshots to Deb because I was just like, of course, this is perfect. She said she loves you.
Awesome. Also, this
Miles and I can totally take it away, but if anyone has any questions that they want to start with, that's also welcome. Hunter, my man, yes, go for it.
Yeah, I just had a quick question kind of in regards to like getting in contact with Haymaker. I know like you mentioned when you first started working there, like you were the only like employee besides the actual owners. And I've always thought like personally, like I'd love to work at a small agency or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
How did you even get in contact with, you know, like an agency like that is like so small?
Totally. Yeah, because they don't have name recognition. It's not like I knew to like Google search Haymaker, right? Yeah, that's a great question. So, and I feel like this is pretty typical for how most people get jobs in advertising, is it's always a network of people. So it's like, gosh, how did it go? There was kind of 2 paths at once that led. So it was kind of like this perfect like intersection. So I had talked to Deb and I was like, hey, I am struggling. I am not finding anything. So she has her feelers out, right? Then I somehow, I was researching LA-based agencies. I came across TWA Shy at Day. I found a guy named Matt Heath, who was like a very high-level guy, but he was a U of O alum. I reached out to him. We had a phone call. He's like, we're chatting it up. It's whatever. It's cool. He's like, man, I really like you, but do not come here. It is terrible. I am leaving. I'm going to start my own thing. I'm like, well, that's kind of crazy. I was hoping that you'd give me a job, but okay, thank you for telling me not to go there. And by the way, like every person's like experience at every agency is going to be a little bit different. So like, don't take that as like a to avoid them, like, I don't know. So yeah, so we have that conversation. He's like, hey, I'm going to like put you in contact with a couple people I know. So I'm like, cool, that sounds great. Then I get So Matt, one of the owners at Haymaker, contacted Deb independently. He was like, hey, I'm looking for someone who fits this description. She's like, I got the girl for you. Intro, Paige. I chat with Matt. Then the other Matt Heath, that I had originally talked with, he's like, hey, how's it going? Like, have you talked with anyone? I'm like, hey, I just had this interesting conversation with a guy named Matt Johnson, and he's starting an agency called Haymaker. And he's like, no way. I used to be partners with Jay, his partner. So wait, like 10 years ago. And he's like, let me hit Jay up and tell him that, you know, you're great. And so then he hits Jay up. And so then I talk with Jay. And then like 2 days later, I had a real like interview. And then I got an offer after that. So honestly, like that's a great thing because it's really just like you're talking with people and then stuff happens, but it also is pretty intimidating because it's like, man, you basically have to know somebody, or someone has to know someone, and they have to like you enough to like get you their info, you know. So it's just a lot of that. Like honestly, your whole job searching experience is going to be a lot of like conversations and extra contacts and following up on the extra contact, and you know, and then that person will like recommend you, and people trust their friends. So yeah, that, I hope that explains. But yeah, that's kind of how
Yeah,
I found.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. So
I had a question kind of on a different note than that. On you were so at the beginning you talked about how like you have clients like foreign and domestic, and I wanted in that like I'm curious about doing that also and like going abroad potentially. And I just wanted to know like what were the differences between your process when working with like a company in the US versus something that you know is going to be shown outside of the US.
Yeah. Well, man, I feel like honestly a lot of that's baked into the brief usually. So like some big differences will be just basic things like media. Um, for, I mean, I've done a ton of, most of my US stuff has been very social based. And then the times that I've gotten to do TV based stuff has been for Japan. And so that's kind of cool. And obviously it has different challenges. And then you learn stuff like every country has different rules about advertising on television. So uh, a Japanese TV spot is 15 seconds. Like that's their standard unit. And so that really informs your kind of creative process because then you're storytelling in a totally different way, right? But as far as like, it's a little bit different, I would say, between words. So I'm not writing for Japan. My boss does that. He's Japanese and fluent and everything. So it's, you know, but we concept together. So I would say that the process of coming up or coming to sort of a human truth is very similar, regardless of what market it's going to go into. You just have to sort of make sure that some of the nuances are still compatible. And so in that sense, it's a lot of me floating stuff out to go and him being like, yeah, that totally checks out, or like, that wouldn't make any sense for us, you know? And then, you know, sometimes with art direction, it's a little easier because like I was working on a project for Apple, for the App Store for New Year, and I was able to use some knowledge that I had learned from a story that Go had told me like months before about how every business in Japan has a red stamp that's like woodblock stamped. That's like a legal seal, and it's just like a thing that they've always had, and they're like, it's part of their culture and people are very familiar with it, and they're very proud of that. And so for one of the art directions, I kind of used that wooden stamp influence in how it like the piece was going to look, and that was like really well received, and just fit the brief very well. So I would say a lot of it is just spending time learning about sort of the nitty gritty of what your audience, you know, like who your audience is. And that goes for like, you know, domestic clients as well. Like obviously you need to know who you're talking to get those like good insights. But yeah, I mean, I would say that I think the biggest differences are really just are written into a good brief, I would say. But yeah, everything else is kind of case by case. But I mean, you learn weird stuff like the 15-second ad rule, or like in Japan, there's a thing called double sponsorship. So if you're writing a TV spot, you have to make sure that it looks like it's only for one brand or product. And if it looks like there's another potential brand that this could be a spot for, they'll charge you twice. So, which is just crazy. But yeah, I don't know. I think everything's just kind of you learn as you go. But yeah, I think hopefully that kind of answers your question. A lot of it, fortunately, you can, if you have bosses who are willing to work with you, most of it I think you can learn as you go, and is really just it's like just an extension of the learning process anyway. So yeah, hopefully that kind of helps. Also, to the person who asked, do I speak Japanese? I do not. So this has been a truly like ground zero kind of like learning experience. So yeah. What else?
That's so interesting to hear about. I'd never even considered any of that. From switching it up again to a whole nother direction,
Sweet.
when you were mentioning those 120 people you reached out to, did you find a certain format, certain phrasing that was more successful? I know for me at least, whenever I'm sending LinkedIn messages, I kind of vary it because I haven't figured out what quite like continuously gets responses yet.
Yeah. Gosh, that's a great question. So I think write in a way that is so specific to them that they know that this is not something you copy and pasted. People like to see effort, and they like to know you're not a robot. I know I've actually done this different on the receiving end. I had a recruiter reach out to me, and her email was so formulaic that I thought it was like a spam, generated like kind of response. And so I asked her like, hey, like, where did you get my email from? And she's like, the school. And just the way that she responded, the school, like I was like, this feels not real. So I ignored her, which then it turned out it was an actual person with like an actual company. And later I wanted to apply there, but I'm like, shoot, I totally burned bridges there because I thought that this was not real. So I would say, when you're reaching out to someone, stalk them, like do such a good job looking at their past work. I have found if you find people who have something in common with you and you offer that information, it makes it easier for them to respond. So, I mean, ducks are always great, but then, maybe you look someone up and they have something buried at the bottom of their portfolio and it's about a band that you also like. Like if you bring that up, that is an easy way for them to return the conversation. And then the last thing is be specific in what you're asking upfront. Because I think a lot of times if you try to do like little sneak attack where you're like, I just want advice or whatever, like people are like, I don't like, do they want a mentor? Because I don't have time to be a mentor, like, so say something specific about them, give them something to respond that's easy to respond, and then tell them exactly what you want. And that is tough because it's really hard to formulate something that feels like still nice and upbeat without saying like, hi, I need a job, like, do you know anyone who has a job for me? Like it's such a dance, but I think starting with a like, I think one thing that I used was like, hey, like I, am an art director. I'm trying to get into, the LA area. I have been working on X piece in my book. Would you review it? And just give them one single thing to look at. People are a lot more likely to respond to like here's one page that I would really love your take on, than just asking for a general portfolio review. So, stuff like that. Also, honestly, if they have a picture with their dog on their portfolio, say something about the dog, they will respond. Like that was a no miss situation. So yeah, dog people,
So just search for dogs and then reach out once you find a dog.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Easy. Well, does anyone else want to take the next question? Any burning thoughts? Yes, birthday girl.
So I'm trying to think about how to form this question, but I guess I'm kind of curious about like portfolios and how I should go about like prioritizing the work that I show in my portfolio, because like I just redid mine and it feels like I put all the projects that I have like the art director title on because that's like the title that I want in the future, and it feels like kind of one-dimensional to me. So I'm wondering like how much, like how beneficial it would be to include like art projects that I did in other classes and things that like aren't really full like projects that I necessarily collaborated on a team with, or like, and like kind of how do you go about incorporating that kind of stuff into a portfolio?
Yeah, absolutely. I have one of those, or I have that stuff on my book. And it's kind of changed throughout the years. So like when I was in school, I had, maybe like 3 or 4, what I would call like a campaign, the things that have the writing, all of the extra legs, like whatever. And then I had a couple of, since I was actually I was a digital arts double major. So I had a lot of like actual like art or graphic design work that wasn't necessarily it wasn't an ad anything, but it was a project. So, there was one term that I did an independent study where I created a piece a week that responded to a different life philosophy. So I had like a written component with everything. So it was kind of big. So that got its own page and its own tile in my portfolio. But sort of over the years, you might replace that with other actual like campaign work. And then that kind of stuff moves to like a separate tab. So I have a tab that I call the creative feed. And that's where I put all of my one-off projects, or maybe it's not a true one-off. Maybe there's a couple things in it, but I'll put a few photos from each project within that tab. And I think that that's the smartest way to go about addressing extra things that you've created, especially if you're the kind of person who's just like a prolific maker. I like one of the recruiters at Wieden Kennedy said that she looks like for like being a prolific maker as one of the top 2 qualities that she looks for in a candidate. So I think that does a really good job of just showing all the things that you've tried, especially stuff in like extra mediums, like I was talking about, all of your laser cut, t-shirt, physical handcrafted things. Yeah, so I think the funny and sad thing about portfolios, and it's very true, is that you want it to be so stupidly simple for people to understand, because I've watched recruiters and I've watched people internally look at people's books, and you are lucky if you get more than 30 seconds. No joke. So people aren't, doing you the justice that your work really deserves. They're kind of just getting a blush about who do you feel like, and what do you like making, what do you like looking at. So I think the best way to do that is to have, your traditional campaigns up front, and then a separate tab with just fun things to scroll through. And don't worry about that being a used format. Like everybody does something kind of like that. What's going to make you stand out is the actual work, not the way your book is set up. I know that's one thing that like you get really wrapped up in sort of in schools. Like you want your portfolio to look a different way than everyone else's, but like don't worry about that. Honestly, it's a waste of time. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah. On that same note, kind of nitpicky, what do you think of for landing pages, just in your experience? Do you think if they have like designs that don't have to do with necessarily the work, but just like a cohesive look, is that something that might stop people from clicking more because you only have those 30 seconds?
Totally. Yeah. Honestly, and it's not even so much about like the cool cohesive look, it's about load time. So like, honestly, I've watched people click out of someone's portfolio just because their images weren't like loading and like in the first like instantly. So I think a lot of times the weight or the extra, like, and that sucks because that has to do with their internet speed. It has nothing really to, I mean, unless you're like just putting up like massive, like billboard sized images that take forever, so watch that. And actually I had to do this recently. So I used to have a bunch of GIFs on my homepage. And sometimes they would load great and sometimes they would not. And so I removed half of them. And that's still a risk because for someone's internet, the GIF might not load. So But yeah, I would say landing pages, honestly, avoid them. Even though it does look cool, that's like an agency thing, you know, like as an agency, you have like a cool landing page and whatever, but as an individual, I just wouldn't do it. So, yep.
Very good to know. I think Isa, I saw your hand up a little bit ago. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I just had a question. So I know earlier that you were saying that so it seems as though like you've basically been working more with like, okay, like smaller agencies, bigger clients though. So like my question is like the trajectory of like balancing your design work as an art director, and just kind of like once you're looking for like entry level positions, you know, like should you vie for a designer position so that, you know, like you're able to prove your salt, or should you try and, you know, scour, you know, the job market for just like art director,
actual art director title? Yeah, dude, that's so hard, honestly. Agencies get weirdly like kind of butthurt over like the title of art director designer. Like some agencies, like if you come in saying as a junior saying like I'm an art director, they'll be like who does this kid think they are, you know? And I think that's stupid, because honestly they really are different things. You're asking to do different work ultimately, but so some agencies will require you to start as a designer, and then say that an art director is something you work up towards, but that just depends on the agency. So I actually started at Haymaker under a title that was called Social Maker. And honestly, I see those popping up more and more, like just this weird kind of made up title that means that you are a creative person who does visuals. And that means that your work is anything that's around that, and might do actual like physical making of stuff, and might be like art directing, like on like a, you know, a large scale. So and then luckily I was able to basically through just saying like I'm an art director, kind of like when I moved to my next job, that's kind of when the title actually stuck. And actually they started me at a title that was something similar, where it was like, here's the job description, here's what we're hiring you to do, but we're treating you like an art director, but we also want you to do other stuff. And then eventually it was like, that doesn't make any sense. You are an art director and that's what you're doing. So, but to answer your question, like, it is a really tough one, because I have seen people from my class start as designers, and then it's harder to transition to an art director later. And that's why it sort of sucks, because there's no industry standard there as far as how many years do you spend as a designer before you become an art director. And, you know, the actual work you're doing is very different. Like people who I've met who are like brilliant designers think differently than art directors. And a lot of that has to do with like certain levels of attention to detail, or just like art directors concept well. And that's not necessarily like my good friends who went to art school to become designers. Concepting is not their strong suit. Obviously, you can learn it both ways. So I would probably suggest looking, if you want to look at a small agency, you will end up doing all of it anyway. So it is kind of a good place to start, because then it does make it easier for you to decide who am I and which way do I want to go. And then you can kind of start to declare your title as you get a little bit of experience. At a bigger agency, they might give you a little crap for that. And I would say you probably won't actually find any like entry-level art director titles. They are so rare. So, you know, I can't give you a clear like this is like the best way to do it. I just know how I sort of approached it, but hopefully that answers your question a little bit. And you know, so I guess one thing I would say is like, if you're interested in a specific agency, reach out to someone who is an art director and someone who is a designer within the agency, and just ask them how they're structured. Because that way you're not sort of like dirtying the water of, you know, you're like, if you were to go and interview, they probably won't be doing the interview there, but they'll give you a good understanding of like, what is the job I'm actually signing up for if I were to go here. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Totally. Good luck.
We're coming up on like the hour, so I mean, we can start to wrap it up. I just had one last question. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to ask, but I just wanted to ask, like, I know it's cliche, but if you could tell yourself 3 things, like fresh, if you yourself now could tell freshly graduated you 3 things to just either like inspire, or like keep, what would you just say to yourself?
Oh, I would say run your own race, because comparison is the thief of joy. Especially people who like with your own class, like everyone's going to progress differently and reach different levels at different times. And that doesn't mean that you're not doing a good job. You know, and you don't actually know what it's like. You know, I mean, I think a lot of people put on a happy face on social media, and they might actually hate their job. So, but in that vein, keep in contact with your people, make all kinds of friends right now at the U of O. You don't know who's gonna like make it or who you're gonna actually interface with later in life. Like, so it's pretty incredible how networks work like that. And word does get around. So be a good team player while you're at the SOJC. And lastly, do non-work related things and find an agency that allows you to do non-work related things. You know, like you got to be a whole person. Like I love my job. Like also, I guess, ask that question to people and see their reaction when you're interviewing to get an understanding of what the culture is like. Like, and if they can't say with a straight face that they love their job, you know, just take that with a grain of salt. Yeah, but I love my job, but like you gotta have outside things that you're doing. You gotta be real human. So, yep, that's what I'd say.
Oh, such good advice. And not a real question, but an important one nonetheless. Can we all add you on LinkedIn? I'm sure everyone would
Totally.
love to
Yeah.
bother you with more questions in the coming months and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you've got anything that you're like, I can't say that in front of a crowd, like, yeah, hit me up.
Amazing. So everyone, we will have all that info on After Hours. And yeah, thank you so much, Paige. That was such a great way to kick off our term.
Awesome. Yeah, good luck, guys. Have fun.
Thank you all so much for coming too.
Thank you.
Thank you.